When Michael Phelps returned to his old high school in Towson, Maryland, he expected to find memories of his early swimming career. But what he didn't expect was to see the shadow of Mr. Jordan, the janitor who gave him hope when he was cut from the high school swim team, still cleaning the poolside at the age of 80, a discovery that shocked the greatest swimmer of all time. No one could have predicted the next series of actions he would take to repay a debt of gratitude that lasted nearly 3 decades. Even Mr. Jordan, who had spent his entire life at this school, could not have predicted what Michael would do next. Michael Phelps walked down the stone path leading to Towson High School, his steps heavy like they were being pulled down by an invisible thread of memories. Right in front of him was the old school, still looking as familiar as ever, with rows of maple trees glowing red like fire in the autumn sun, and the smell of fresh grass wafting in the air. As the school bell rang to signal the end of class, it lingered like a reminder of the past. Makes him feel very emotional. A guy who's now a swimming legend with 28 Olympic medals. Just how much he wanted to revisit those simple memories, even with his crazy schedule packed with ad deals and motivational speaking gigs. He kept walking until he was stopped by the weathered wooden door of the main hallway, his eyes scanning the cream-colored walls that had turned yellowish over time. He pushed the wooden door open with his hand. The only sound was the creaking sound that echoed into the swimming pool area, the area most familiar to him in his memory. He glanced inside. There was a small figure moving slowly beside the swimming pool, an old man with his bald head reflecting the light from the ceiling lamp and wearing an old dark gray sweater, was carefully mopping the floor with his hands, shaking, like small ripples hitting the edge of the pool. But his every move screamed devotion, as if the floor itself was whispering a soft thank you to him. The man looked so familiar, too familiar, that it made Michael's heart race, and he froze, his eyes widening. His mind flashed back to Mr. Jordan, the janitor who'd been working at Towson since Michael was just a scrawny kid, always getting picked on for his skinny frame. At 80 years old, Mr. Jordan was still here, his back hunched like he was carrying the weight of time itself, his cloudy eyes still shining with a warmth that never faded. "Mr. Jordan, is that you?" Michael called out, his voice shaky like ripples on water. Caught off guard by hearing his name, the old man flinched slightly, then looked up, a kind smile spreading across his cracked lips. "Michael, is that you?" Mr. Jordan replied, his voice small but warm like a ray of winter sunshine. That voice, so familiar, hit Michael like a wave, and he couldn't hold back his emotions. His feet moved fast, arms wide open, wrapping Mr. Jordan in a tight hug. It was like a long overdue thank you, a way for Michael to say he'd never forgotten what this man had done for him. They sat down on a beat-up wooden bench nearby, the surface rough and scratched with years of student carvings. It was like Mr. Jordan's memories were slowly coming back, his bony hands clasped tightly together as he started talking about the days when Michael was just a 14-year-old kid, cut from the school's swim team because the coach thought he was too skinny and had no potential. As he listened, Michael lowered his head like a student taking in a teacher's words, his eyes empty as he remembered those days when he thought he'd never make it. But Mr. Jordan, the humble janitor with a dark green apron that always smelled like cleaning supplies, saw something in that kid. Every time he caught Michael sitting alone in the hallway looking defeated, he'd stop, pat his shoulder with that deep, warm voice and say, "Don't give up, kid. A small body doesn't decide how big your heart is." Those words, day after day, simple as they were, lit a tiny fire in Michael's chest, pushing him to keep going. He dragged himself to the pool alone for a whole year, his skinny arms slicing through the water, no matter the bone-chilling cold of winter mornings or the scorching summer heat. By the end of that year, his body had started to fill out, muscles forming on shoulders that used to be nothing but skin and bones. Michael was so pumped he shouted in the middle of the pool when he got picked for the backup squad of a local swim club. Not long after, at just 15, he broke a national high school record, a turning point that led him to glory and ultimately made him a legend. But when Michael asked about Mr. Jordan's life now, the smile on the old man's face faded, replaced by a look that avoided Michael's gaze, like he was scared to face the truth. At 80, he was still working, not because he loved it, but because he had no other choice. 3 years ago, his wife, Ellen, had been in a bad car accident. It left her paralyzed from the waist down and with memory loss, unable to take care of herself. With the little money he made as a janitor, Mr. Jordan had to cover their living expenses, her medical bills, and her care. "I can't stop working," Mr. Jordan whispered, his voice faint like a fading echo. "If I stop, who's going to take care of Ellen? And I want to stay here, watching these kids grow up, like I watched you grow up." Michael felt his heart tighten. Mr. Jordan wasn't just the guy who helped him through tough times. He'd been quietly following Michael's career all these years. He shared how every time Michael won an Olympic medal, he'd cut out the newspaper articles and paste them into a little scrapbook filled with silent pride. "I've always been proud of you," Mr. Jordan said, his eyes sparkling with a mix of joy and sadness. Michael couldn't let Mr. Jordan keep living like this. He invited him to dinner at a small diner near the school. As Mr. Jordan walked slowly, his faded old coat wrapped around his frail frame, Michael watched quietly, his heart heavy with gratitude and guilt. At the diner, the warm glow of the yellow lights lit up their table as they reminisced about the past. Mr. Jordan talked about how Michael used to wander the school halls after class and how he'd tried his best to keep the kid from giving up. Michael realized that without Mr. Jordan, he might have never become an Olympic champion. At the same time, he couldn't shake the sadness in Mr. Jordan's eyes when he talked about his life. It wasn't just money troubles. Mr. Jordan had faced prejudice too. Once, a group of rich parents at the school looked down on him because of his skin color, calling him the old black guy who just sweeps the floors, and telling their kids to stay away from him. Even so, Mr. Jordan kept working with all his heart because he believed every kid deserved a chance, no matter where they came from or what they looked like. Hearing this, Michael's blood boiled, a mix of anger and helplessness washing over him at the unfairness Mr. Jordan had endured. After dinner, Michael canceled a big ad deal signing with a fashion brand to dig deeper into Mr. Jordan's situation. The next morning, he drove back to the school, and after meeting Mr. Jordan, he asked to visit his house. Mr. Jordan hesitated at first but finally agreed, inviting Michael over for lunch that day. While waiting, Michael visited the old pools where he used to train tirelessly. The water still sparkling, like his memories, but now stirring a mix of pride and heartache inside him. Finally, Mr. Jordan finished his shift, and they hopped into Michael's car to head to his home in the outskirts of Baltimore. When Michael stepped into the small house, he was shocked because the place was falling apart with a leaky roof, peeling walls like broken pieces of time, and a moldy smell that hit him hard. As he moved to the kitchen, it was a tiny space with rusty old appliances. And then he glanced at the bathroom, a cramped room with a narrow door that didn't even have space for Ellen's wheelchair to get through. Then Michael saw Ellen sitting in an old chair, her stare blank like a starless sky, while Mr. Jordan gently fed her spoonfuls of oatmeal, his movements tender but full of pain. That sight broke Michael's heart. On the drive home, he didn't say much, but a decision had already formed in his mind, with a fierce determination burning in his chest. Mr. Jordan had given him the belief to become the Michael Phelps he was today, and now it was his turn to change Mr. Jordan's life. He knew he couldn't stop at just a dinner or a simple thank you. Mr. Jordan deserved so much more: a better life, a safer home, and a future free of worry. In the end, Michael told himself, even in a world full of unfairness, there's always room for gratitude and hope. After visiting Mr. Jordan's house, the image of Ellen sitting in that rickety chair, her eyes empty like a starless sky, and Mr. Jordan feeding her with such gentle care, stuck with Michael like glue. He drove away from the outskirts of Baltimore, the sunset glowing red like dried blood across the sky. But his heart felt heavy, like it was carrying Mr. Jordan's burden. He knew he couldn't just stand by and watch the man who changed his life struggle like this. Mr. Jordan wasn't just a janitor. He was the spark that lit Michael's dream, and now it was Michael's turn to light up his life. The next morning, Michael woke up early, a fire of determination blazing in his chest. He canceled all his business meetings for the week, from a pitch with a sports gear brand to a photo shoot for an energy drink ad. Instead, he spent the whole morning in his small home office, papers scattered across the oak desk, a cold cup of coffee sitting untouched nearby. Michael started planning how to improve Mr. Jordan's life, not just to say thanks, but to make sure he and Ellen could live the rest of their days with the dignity they deserved.
Before we continue the story, where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to tap that little like button to motivate us to create more exciting stories.
First, Michael zeroed in on Mr. Jordan's crumbling house. That place, with its leaky roof and peeling walls like shards of forgotten time, wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of all the struggles Mr. Jordan had quietly endured. Michael picked up his phone and called Jake, an old buddy from Towson High who now ran a legit construction company in Baltimore. "Jake, I need you for something big," Michael said, his voice steady like it was back when he stood on the starting block before an Olympic race. Jake, with his curly brown hair and rolled-up shirt sleeves, listened to Mr. Jordan's story over the phone and didn't hesitate. "You got it, Michael. I'll bring my whole crew over this week," Jake replied, his voice buzzing with excitement. Michael planned to renovate the entire house while Mr. Jordan and Ellen were away on a vacation. He wanted to turn it into a safe, comfortable space, especially for Ellen, with wider pathways for her wheelchair, a bathroom designed for her needs, and a new kitchen so Mr. Jordan wouldn't have to cook in that moldy, cramped space anymore. But the biggest thing? Michael wanted to keep it a secret, a total surprise for Mr. Jordan, a way to say thank you without any fancy words. He only told a small group of people about the project, like Jake and a few close friends who understood what it meant to give back. To make sure Mr. Jordan and Ellen wouldn't be around during the renovation, Michael came up with the idea of sending them on a vacation. He booked a week-long trip to a fancy resort in Hawaii, where the gentle sunshine and waves lapping against white sand beaches felt like a warm invitation to peace. Michael covered every cost up front, even arranging for a private nurse to look after Ellen during the trip. He called Mr. Jordan, his tone soft but persuasive. "Mr. Jordan, I want to treat you and Ellen to a little getaway. Just a week to relax. I've got everything covered." Mr. Jordan, his voice hesitant over the phone, tried to say no at first. "You don't have to do that, Michael. I'm not used to trips like this." But Michael kept at it, his sincerity impossible to resist. And finally, Mr. Jordan agreed, though he still sounded a bit worried. Meanwhile, Michael quietly got everything ready to make sure Mr. Jordan's trip went off without a hitch. He rented a special van to take them to the airport, driven by a middle-aged guy with a friendly smile and a dark blue baseball cap. Michael also packed a small suitcase for Mr. Jordan, stuffing it with new clothes, a straw hat to shield him from the sun, and a short handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Jordan, enjoy this trip. You deserve it. I'll see you soon. Michael." As the van pulled away from the neighborhood, Michael watched from a distance, a mix of nerves and satisfaction bubbling inside him. He knew this was just the first step in his plan. At the same time, Jake's construction crew was ready to roll. They showed up at Mr. Jordan's house right after he left, their trucks loaded with materials, from fresh lumber to modern kitchen appliances. Michael stood in the small front yard, where weeds poked through the ground, and the rotting wooden fence looked like it was telling a story of hard times. He watched the crew start measuring and planning, determined to turn this place into a real home. "We'll work fast, but it's got to be perfect," Michael told Jake, his voice as firm as it used to be when he rallied his swim team before a big meet. While the crew got to work, Michael wasn't just thinking about the house. He started planning something bigger, a financial safety net to make sure Mr. Jordan and Ellen never had to worry about money again. He reached out to a financial advisor, a sharp-eyed woman with short black hair, to talk about setting up a trust fund. "I want him to never have to work again, unless he really wants to," Michael said, his voice full of resolve. The advisor nodded, a small smile on her face. "I'll take care of it, Michael. This is a beautiful thing you're doing." Every step of Michael's plan was done with care and heart, just like how he used to prepare for every stroke in his swimming career. He didn't just want to thank Mr. Jordan. He wanted to show the world that gratitude can change lives. and that people like Mr. Jordan, often overlooked or judged because of their simple jobs or skin color, deserve to be valued. Even so, Michael knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Renovating the house was just the start, and he'd need more help to make this dream come true. But he wasn't backing down. For Michael, this wasn't just a project, it was a mission, a way to prove that the greatest victories aren't in the pool, but in the impact you can have on someone's life. With Mr. Jordan and Ellen settled at the resort in Hawaii, Michael jumped right into the renovation. Early on the first day, sunlight streamed through the sparse trees, casting golden patches on the small front yard of Mr. Jordan's house, where weeds grew wild like a forgotten rug. Jake's crew rolled in, the rumble of their truck engines sounding like a determined anthem kicking things off. The workers in sweat-soaked tees and bright yellow hard hats got to work tearing down the leaky roof, the steady sound of hammers and drills ringing out like the heartbeat of a house coming back to life. Michael stood in the yard, hands on his hips, his gaze sharp like it was back when he sized up the competition pool before a big race. He oversaw every step. The roof was replaced with sturdy red shingles, the damp kitchen was torn out to make way for a modern setup, and the plumbing was upgraded so the house wouldn't flood every time a big rain hit. The peeling walls were painted a soft cream white, like a promise of a fresh start. Every detail was under Michael's watchful eye, with the same dedication he'd once put into breaking world records. While the crew worked, the neighbors started getting curious. On day one, a few folks watched from a distance, their eyes wide with surprise seeing Michael Phelps, a legit Olympic legend, standing in the middle of a construction mess, his gray tee covered in dust, his sneakers caked with mud. Mrs. Carter, an older neighbor with her silver hair tied back and a loud floral apron, walked over, her voice shaky. "You're Michael Phelps, right? What are you doing here?" Michael smiled, his eyes warm, and told her Mr. Jordan's story, the janitor who changed his life. "I just want to give back to him, Mrs. Carter. He deserves this," Michael said, his voice as genuine as a heartfelt promise. Michael's story spread like wildfire on dry grass. The neighbors, at first just curious, were now touched by his gratitude. Mrs. Carter, her hands trembling, offered to help. "Can I do anything for you and Mr. Jordan?" "I make a mean apple pie." Another neighbor, Mr. Harris, with a salt and pepper beard and a faded checkered shirt, chimed in. "I can bring my lawnmower over, clean up this yard for you." Michael couldn't say no to their kindness. He nodded, a big grin on his face. And just like that, a small group of neighbors jumped in, their laughter mixing with the sound of hammers and drills. The community's involvement didn't stop there. The story of Mr. Jordan's house renovation got shared on a local social media group called Good Deeds Around Town. The post blew up with hundreds of likes and comments, people cheering Michael on for his gratitude. Among those who saw it were plenty of Towson High alumni, folks who'd known Mr. Jordan, who'd been lifted up by his simple but powerful words of encouragement. They started showing up at Mr. Jordan's house in the days that followed, each bringing something to help with the renovation. One alum, Emily, now an architect with long blonde hair tied up in round-frame glasses, volunteered to rebuild the fence. "Mr. Jordan helped me get through being bullied back in the day," she said, her eyes sparkling with memories. "I want to do something for him." Another alum, Tom, a tall guy with a thick beard, brought a whole set of new pots and pans for the kitchen, grinning wide. "Mr. Jordan always told me to keep pushing, no matter how tough life got. This is the least I can do." Those small gifts, along with the community's energy, meant the renovation finished a whole day ahead of Michael's original plan. While the house was coming together, Michael didn't forget his bigger goal: setting up a financial foundation for Mr. Jordan. He worked with his financial advisor, the sharp-eyed woman with short black hair, to create a trust fund. It would make sure Mr. Jordan and Ellen had enough money for living expenses and medical bills for the rest of their lives, so he'd never have to work for money again. Michael sat in his small home office, the desk lamp casting a glow on his face, signing the final papers with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He knew this wasn't just a gift for Mr. Jordan. It was a way to send a message that people like him, often overlooked or judged, deserved to be valued and supported. At the same time, Mr. Jordan's house had been completely transformed. The cream-white walls glowed in the sunlight, the bright new kitchen with modern appliances felt like a warm invite, and the widened pathways were designed so Ellen could move easily in her wheelchair. Michael stood in the front yard, where the grass was now neatly trimmed and the freshly painted white fence sparkled in the sun, feeling a mix of pride and nervous excitement. He knew the moment Mr. Jordan came back would be one of the most meaningful of his life. Even so, Michael wasn't done. He started thinking about others like Mr. Jordan, school workers who'd quietly given so much, but were often forgotten by society. The idea of a bigger fund to help people like Mr. Jordan across the U.S. started taking shape in his mind. But first, he wanted to focus on the moment ahead, the day Mr. Jordan returned, when the whole community would come together to witness the power of gratitude and unity. To Michael, this wasn't just a gift from Mr. Jordan. It was proof that, even in a world full of unfairness, a little kindness can change everything. The day Mr. Jordan and Ellen got back from Hawaii, the little neighborhood on the outskirts of Baltimore came alive like never before. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, scattering glittering patches on the road leading to Mr. Jordan's house, like a gentle welcome. Hundreds of people gathered in front of the newly renovated home, turning the small yard into a lively festival. Neighbors from Mrs. Carter in her loud floral apron to Mr. Harris with his salt and pepper beard were busy setting up for the big reveal. The smell of Mrs. Carter's classic apple pies floated through the air, mixing with the savory aroma of golden roasted chickens Mr. Harris brought over. Meanwhile, Towson High alumni, from Emily with her blonde hair tied up to Tom with his thick beard, showed up with housewarming gifts like table lamps, curtains, and even a cozy armchair for Ellen. Laughter and chatter blended with the soft strum of acoustic music from a small speaker, creating a warm, joyful vibe. Michael stood in the middle of the crowd, his gray tee still stained with dust from the renovation days, his eyes shining with anticipation. He looked down the road where the special van carrying Mr. Jordan and Ellen was slowly pulling up. When the van stopped, Michael walked over, a huge smile lighting up his face to greet them. Mr. Jordan stepped out, his steps slow, still wearing the straw hat Michael had given him. Ellen was wheeled out by the nurse, her face blank but somehow brighter, as if the Hawaiian sun had left a glow on her skin. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Jordan," Michael shouted, his voice bursting with excitement, and the crowd behind him erupted in applause. Mr. Jordan looked up, his cloudy eyes going wide with shock as he saw his house. The beat-up old place, once worn down by time, had been totally transformed. The cream-white walls gleamed in the sunlight. The red shingle roof looked brand new, and the yard was neat and tidy like something out of a magazine. He froze, his trembling hands pressing against his chest, like he couldn't believe his eyes. Even Ellen, who couldn't speak, looked up at the house with a dreamy gaze, as if some distant memory was trying to come back. "Oh my goodness, is this my house?" Mr. Jordan whispered, his voice choking up like a quiet prayer. Michael stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Jordan. This is your house, a new home for you and Ellen." The crowd exploded with cheers and clapping, but Mr. Jordan just lowered his head, tears rolling down his wrinkled cheeks. Mrs. Carter, standing nearby, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief while Mr. Harris hugged his wife, a satisfied smile on his face. Michael led Mr. Jordan and Ellen inside, taking slow steps so they could soak in every change. The new kitchen was bright with modern appliances, from the oven to the fridge, designed so Mr. Jordan could cook with ease. The spacious bathroom had grab bars and a non-slip floor, made just for Ellen to move safely in her wheelchair. The hallways were widened, with natural light pouring through new windows, like a sign that the dark days were over. Every detail was built to help Ellen, but also to give Mr. Jordan a more comfortable life, one he deserved for so long. Mr. Jordan walked through the house, his eyes never leaving each little detail. He touched the freshly painted walls, his shaky hands feeling the smooth surface, like he needed to make sure it wasn't a dream. Then he turned to Michael, his voice breaking. "Why'd you do this, Michael? I'm just an old janitor. I don't deserve this." Michael looked him straight in the eyes, his gaze steady but full of emotion, and said, "No, Mr. Jordan. You're not just an old janitor. You're the guy who believed in me when no one else did. when no one thought a skinny kid like me could swim. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here today. This is my way of saying thank you for everything." Michael's words hit like a stone dropped in still water, sending waves of emotion crashing through Mr. Jordan. He pulled Michael into a tight hug, his tears soaking into Michael's tea. The crowd around them couldn't hold back their own emotions. Mrs. Carter let out a choked sob, and Tom's eyes turned red. They weren't just seeing a house made new, they were witnessing a story of gratitude, of how a small act from the past, like Mr. Jordan's encouragement, could change a whole life, and now how that life was giving back in the biggest way. Meanwhile, the party in the yard kept going, with long tables piled high with apple pies, roasted chickens, and pitchers of ice-cold lemonade the alumni brought. Laughter echoed through the yard, mixing with the warm sunlight, like a symphony of joy and togetherness. Michael stood among the crowd, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over him. He looked at Mr. Jordan, now sitting beside Ellen, with a gentle smile Michael hadn't seen since their reunion at Towson High. It was the smile of someone who'd found hope in the darkest days, and for Michael, that was the greatest reward he could have asked for. Even so, Michael knew this story wasn't over. He'd changed Mr. Jordan's life, but a new fire had been lit inside him, a fire to keep giving and helping others like Mr. Jordan. He told himself this was just the first step, that there was still so much unfairness in the world to fix. But for today, he just wanted to soak in this moment, the moment when gratitude had brought a whole community together and brought happiness to the man who'd helped him through his toughest days. After the emotional reveal of the new house, Michael had one last surprise up his sleeve for Mr. Jordan. While the party outside was still buzzing with laughter and the smell of apple pie, Michael led Mr. Jordan into the living room, where the soft glow of a new table lamp lit up the cream-white walls. He pulled a white envelope from his pocket with his neat handwriting on it. "To Mr. Jordan, the man who changed my life." Mr. Jordan, his hands trembling, took the envelope, his cloudy eyes full of curiosity and emotion. Inside was a handwritten letter and a stack of documents. Michael stood beside him, a warm smile on his face, and said, "Mr. Jordan, I've paid off all your debts, everything from Ellen's medical bills to the mortgage on this house. I've also set up a trust fund to make sure you and Ellen have enough money to live on and cover health care for the rest of your lives. You don't have to worry about money ever again." Mr. Jordan read the letter, each word hitting him like a hammer to the heart. He looked up, his teary eyes meeting Michael's, and whispered, "Michael, I don't know what to say." But Michael wasn't done. He went on, his voice steady but warm. "I want you to retire, Mr. Jordan. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to rest." But Mr. Jordan shook his head slowly, that familiar gentle smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, Michael, but I can't retire," he said, his voice small but firm like a steady breeze. "I want to keep working at Towson, not for the money, but because I want to help kids like you back then. There are still so many students out there who need someone to believe in them, someone to tell them not to give up." Mr. Jordan's words were like a beam of light cutting through Michael's mind, making him realize that this man wasn't just a janitor, he was an inspiration, someone who'd chosen to dedicate his life to helping young people, no matter the struggles or prejudice he faced. Michael nodded, his eyes filled with respect, and said, "I understand, Mr. Jordan. If that's what you want, I won't push you. But please, let me take care of you and Ellen, so you can keep doing what you love without any worries." Mr. Jordan smiled, giving a small nod, like a silent agreement. Mr. Jordan's story didn't end with the house or the trust fund. Michael, with a new fire burning inside him, decided to start a nonprofit called the Past and Future Foundation. The foundation was created to support school workers like Mr. Jordan across the U.S., people who'd quietly given so much but were often overlooked or judged because of their humble jobs or skin color. Michael held a launch event for the foundation at Towson High, where it all began, with hundreds of successful alumni showing up, from business owners to doctors to athletes like him. They all pitched in, their spirit of giving as bright as the fall sunshine that once lit up the school years ago. The event wasn't just about raising money. It was a powerful example of how gratitude can spread. Michael stood on the stage, the spotlight shining on his face, and told Mr. Jordan's story, From the days he encouraged a skinny kid not to give up, to the moment an entire community came together to change his life. One small act of encouragement can completely change someone's life, Michael said, his voice ringing with emotion. And gratitude, when it spreads, can create miracles. The crowd below clapped nonstop, tears quietly rolling down the cheeks of so many. Mr. Jordan, sitting in the front row, wearing a light blue shirt Mrs. Carter had picked out for him, smiled, his eyes sparkling with pride and happiness. Through helping Mr. Jordan, Michael realized something deep. His greatest victory wasn't the Olympic medals or the world records he'd broken. It was the impact he could have on the people who'd helped him along the way. He looked back on his journey from a skinny kid cut from the swim team to an Olympic legend, and now someone bringing hope to others. Mr. Jordan's story hadn't just changed his life. It had changed Michael, too. He'd become someone who lived with gratitude, with a drive to give back, and with a mission to make the world a better place. The story spread across the U.S., with articles in newspapers and videos going viral on social media, becoming a huge source of inspiration. It reminded everyone that even in a world full of unfairness, from social prejudice to financial struggles, there's always room for gratitude and hope. For Michael, this wasn't the end. It was the start of a bigger mission. He promised himself, with that same fierce determination burning in his chest, that he'd keep spreading gratitude, making sure people like Mr. Jordan were never forgotten again. In the end, under the fiery red sunset of a March evening, Michael stood looking at Towson High from a distance, a quiet sense of fulfillment in his heart, knowing he'd found the true meaning of victory.
If you find the situation in this story interesting, please press the like button, and if you want to hear similar stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story.